Hi, today we're making a mini quilt, and if you sew or quilt regularly, you'll probably have all the supplies you need in your stash. This is a very quick and easy project. To make this snow globe, you're going to need some fusible interfacing, a piece of background fabric that is about 9.5 inches by 9.5 inches. That's the white fabric you see here. You'll need a piece of fabric for the water in the snow globe, a dark fabric for the silhouette, which is the deer and trees, and 2 pieces of fabric to make a stand for the snow globe. You will need a few more items to finish up the quilt, but I'll have everything listed in the instructions along with a diagram of the front of the quilt and a pattern. You want to print off this pattern onto copy paper, and you'll want to print it so that the small circle is 1 inch in diameter. To start this project, you're going to want to trace all of your pieces onto fusible interfacing. The paper side is the side that you put your pencil or pen on. So you're going to put your fusible interfacing over the snow globe, and the first thing you're going to do is trace the outside of the circle. The inside of this you don't need a full piece of interfacing for, so I've kind of marked it with an X because I'm going to cut the middle of this out. It'll just make your applique a little more softer. This piece that we're tracing right now is for the water of the snow globe. Next, you'll want to trace the outside of the snow globe, the deer and the trees, and this will be for your silhouette for your applique. You will want to just continue on tracing your pieces to the snow globe. You'll need to trace both pieces of the base onto a piece of fusible web and a piece for the snowflake if you'd like to use it. Once you've traced out all of your pieces onto fusible web, you'll want to roughly cut the shapes out. You don't want to cut right on the lines that you drew. You want to leave a little extra space. Once you fuse the web to your fabric, then you will go back and cut on the lines that you drew. So as you can guess, the next part is to actually fuse your fusible web to the wrong side of your fabric. There are a lot of different brands of fusible web on the market. You'll want to read your instructions about how long to iron these and at what temperature to iron the fusible web onto the fabric. You really don't want to underfuse it or overfuse it. Here I'm getting my fusible web ready for ironing it on the back of my fabric. I'm going to cut out the middle of this, as I mentioned earlier. It'll make your applique less stiff if you use less interfacing. So here I'm just cutting out the center. Before you apply your fusible web, you'll want to give your fabric a good ironing to make sure it's nice and flat, and you'll want to flip it over to make sure that you're putting the fusible web on the wrong side of your fabric. If you can't tell what the wrong side is, then there is no wrong side. Really, you can use either side if you have a fabric like that. Here I'm fusing the interfacing to the wrong side of my fabric, the fabric that I'm going to use for the water in my snow globe. And it's a good idea once you fuse this to let it cool and then to check to make sure it adhered correctly. All you do is pull up one little corner and look. You should have the adhesive from the interfacing stuck to the fabric, and you'll be able to tell that because it'll be like a shiny kind of a waxy gluey looking surface. This piece right here, the snow globe, you're just going to want to cut out the outside edge of the circle. Although it looks like a donut, we're not cutting the inside. That is going to be used on our project, so we're just going to cut on our line that we drew on the outside edge of this snow globe. When we're ready to put this together and adhere it to our background, we're going to peel off that paper and we're going to make sure that we can see the glue easily on the fabric. If we've done it correctly, you'll actually be able to see the glue stuck to the fabric. And we're just going to continue doing the same with all of our pieces of fusible web. We're just going to iron them on to our chosen fabric, and then we're going to cut them out. With all these pieces, I would double check to make sure the fusible part of the interfacing is stuck to your fabric after the piece has cooled. You just want to make sure it's there because you don't want to get to where you're cutting and find out that the paper is moving around on you. For all these applique projects, you really want to have good sharp scissors. If you try cutting them out with dull scissors, you're going to get more fraying. So you really should test your scissors and make sure that they work for your project and that they're nice and sharp. So this piece right here, the deer and the trees, you're going to need probably 2 different pair of scissors to cut this out. I was able to use a big pair that are nice and sharp for the outside edge, but then that was too big for the inside, so I had to go with a smaller pair of scissors. This is a challenging cut, but all the other pieces in this project are super easy. So just kind of work with this and take your time. For the inside area of this silhouette, I would suggest starting with the biggest area first and cut that out. And I would leave the antlers of this deer to the very last because they are kind of fragile. They're connected to the deer with a very small piece of fabric. I ended up using a little pair of scissors that were curved. And they worked really well. I did have to keep moving them in my hand, like taking them off my thumb and finger to make sure the curve was going in the right direction that I wanted it to go in. But they were very sharp and they worked out very well. Although this is a very intricate cut for this applique, the finished project is well worth it. Like I said earlier, all the pieces other than this silhouette are really easy to cut out. So you just kind of have to take your time with this and go at different angles to get this cut out. And it does end up looking really nice. For some of the smaller areas on this applique, you're going to have to find a way to get your scissors in there. And I just found that I could bend the fabric in half and kind of clip it and then go in and into the area at different angles until I could get my scissors in there and maneuver them. I did try an X-Acto knife, a sharp X-Acto knife, and it does cut, and like you could cut a hole to get the scissors in, but I found that the scissors cut the best. If I could get them in the space, they definitely worked better than the X-Acto knife. So here I've switched over to the X-Acto knife just to get a hole started. I did try cutting some of the areas out with the X-Acto knife, but I just found it kind of tedious. If I just put a small hole and got my scissors in there, it went better for me. Once you have your water for your snow globe cut out and your deer silhouette cut out, you can go ahead and fuse them to your background fabric. And your background fabric, it needs to be a 9.5-inch square. Mine is white. And you want to center that from left to right so that the globe is in the middle going left to right. But the top edge of the snow globe should only be about 3/4 of an inch from the top of your background fabric. Before you fuse the fabrics in place, you want to make sure that your snow globe water is slightly smaller than your deer silhouette because you don't want to see that around the edges. You want the edges of your snow globe to be the dark blue. So if you need to, you might have to go in and trim your whatever you used for your water a little bit so that you don't see it when you fuse your deer silhouette on top of it. Once you have your snow globe the water part and the silhouette fused down, you can work on the base. And the base, I didn't show it in the video, but it's very easy to cut out. I would just suggest, since they're straight lines, if you can use a rotary cutter and a ruler, you'll get a better line than if you hand cut a straight line. But you can use whatever you got to cut those out. I fused my snowflake to my base before I fused the base to the background fabric, and I just centered the snowflake from left to right, and then I lined it kind of with the top edge, because when you put the other part of the base on, you're going to overlap it a little bit, so you don't want to go over your snowflake. When I put the base onto the top part of the snow globe, I didn't meet that so that it was flush with the round part of the snow globe. I pulled it down a little bit so there was like an 1/8 inch gap on each side. I wanted it to appear that the base had some thickness to it, so I figured if I left a little gap at the top, it wouldn't be flush with the globe and look like it was paper thin. The last piece that I put on was the very base of the stand for the snow globe. I just overlapped it over the one piece of fabric a little bit. That's it. Once I had all of my pieces fused in place, I cut some 2-inch strips of fabric and made a border for my little mini quilt. I just sewed on the right and left sides first, and then the top and bottom. Once my borders were sewn on, I ironed everything nice and flat, and then I made a quilt sandwich. I picked out a piece of back fabric for this and a piece of batting for the quilt. I made each just a couple inches bigger so that I'd have something to hold on to when I was quilting. For the top stitching for this little mini quilt, I started with the globe first to make sure that was tacked down well, and I used a type of blanket stitch that my machine has. And I sewed the other parts down with a blanket stitch as well. In the white, I did just a meandering quilt stitch, and then on the borders, I just did parallel stitches. I did use different thread colors for this project. I wanted dark blue where the dark blue silhouette was because I didn't want the stitches to show. It's such a small area. On the red part of the base, I used red thread because I didn't want that to show. On the part of the base that was brown, I did use beige thread for that. And then I tried to blend my background stitch, my little meandering stitch, with the fabric, and it's just an off-white. Once I got the top stitching completed, I went ahead and trimmed all of my excess fabric off, and I ended up using a ready-made store-bought binding for this. For small jobs, I kind of like doing that. It doesn't cost very much, and it makes the project go really fast. If you're planning on hanging your little mini quilt, you'll need to put a hanging sleeve or hanging pocket on the back of the quilt. And you normally incorporate this into the binding, so you'll need to have figured out what you're going to do before you sew the binding on. For this little quilt, I cut a strip of fabric that was 2.5 inches wide by the length of the top of my quilt, so it was about 12 inches long. And then I finished the ends so they wouldn't be a raw edge. I just turned them under twice, and then I sewed them in place. The idea for the ends of this strip of fabric is just to finish the ends, and then you also want to make it shorter by at least 1 inch. You don't want the ends of this strip to get caught in your binding. Just the top of this strip will be sewn into your binding. Once I finished the ends, I took the fabric and I folded it in half with wrong sides together, and I gave it a good ironing. Once you have this little hanging pocket made, you're going to take the raw edges of the hanging pocket and you're going to match them with the raw edge of the top of your little quilt, and you're going to center that. You'll want to either pin this little piece of fabric in place or do a basting stitch to hold it in place, but it's going to stay there, and you're just going to apply your binding like you normally apply your binding to a little quilt, and it'll sew this piece of fabric right in the edge. This little hanging sleeve should be sewn into the top of your quilt, but the ends of it should be free so that you can put a wooden dowel or something in there to hang it. You'll want to hand stitch this little binding sleeve down at the bottom edge so that it doesn't flip up when you hang your quilt. So once you hand stitch that little sleeve down and you get yourself a dowel, I bought a 1/4 inch dowel for this little quilt. It's ready to hang. You're finished, and it was a quick little project. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll like and consider subscribing. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.